This is our first meeting of the year. And of course, well, we do have a quorum, but, but 3 out of 4
Excuse
of us
me,
are.
Mr. Mayor, they're all coming down from CDC. We ran late.
Are they on their way down?
They are, yes.
We were going to move or leave until they did show up.
No, they should be down in less than 2 minutes. Literally just signed off.
Well, let's wait until they get down so we can all do the pledge together. I think that sounds good. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, there we are. There's two.
Hey.
Oh, yes. I always feel so much safer.
Hello.
How's that tie feel, Mr. Sullivan?
I know it's been a while.
Really?
How are you, man?
Yeah, hey there.
Been flying around.
Yeah. Hey.
Have we, Councilman Watson coming too? Yeah, okay.
How's Corey?
He's good. He's good. Yeah.
You weren't working at
Happy New Year.
That was a great day to skip that.
Yeah. I had this the amount of time that I had on council. I had on the front porch.
Really?
Oh, I hear him. He's coming.
Week where I didn't have
There he is. Hello.
I was like, there we go.
What do I do? I was grumpy because I'm like, now what?
Hey, no, like I gotta find something to retire.
I'm sitting in the
I'll
right.
drive it.
Exactly. Exactly. Can't retire. Oh no.
Here I am.
Well, yeah.
Well, technically, our meeting has started. Mr. Vodopich, if you want to sit down.
That we can work with.
Okay.
No, I don't.
All right, we did wait for y'all so all of us could stand up and take the pledge together. So how about we stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, now that everybody's come, Madam Clerk, could you call the roll, please?
Mayor McCullough,
I'm here.
Deputy Mayor Carter,
Here.
Councilmember Baldwin,
Here?
Councilmember Evans,
Here.
Councilmember Fullerton,
Here.
Councilmember McClymans,
Here.
Councilmember Swatman,
Present.
and Councilmember Watson.
Here. All right, and to start the year off right, we will now have a presentation from the FCS group on utility rates. Mr. Gonzalez, I remember you. Come on back.
Welcome.
Good evening, and thank you for having me back. It's been a couple months since we originally talked about water and sewer and stormwater rates, and so we will cover a review of, kind of quickly review what we talked about last time with a little more information based on comments that came up during the last meeting that we discussed this topic at, and then there'll be some additional content as promised. So I think if we go, I don't know if I have control of this. Okay. Sorry, I blew it up.
Technology is tricky.
Spot.
Okay, perfect. So let's see. Okay, so just to go over the agenda quickly, I'll provide an overview of what we talked about last time. SDCs, nothing really changed in terms of the results, but I have gathered a little more information to kind of speak to some of the concerns that were raised during the last meeting. And then go into each utility's rates, and then As before, questions and discussion is the last bullet here, but feel free to chime in if any questions do come up during the course of the presentation. So,
Had one over there right now.
oh, I'm sorry.
So do you have a vocabulary slide? Because it always takes me like 3 or 4 of your slides till I'm going, oh, that's what the acronym is. Anachronism?
It could be both.
So
Exactly.
I don't have that, but what I will try to do is spell out every acronym that I reference on the slide.
Thank you.
Sure. And so here's the overview of the rate study process. We have 3 main phases. The first phase, revenue requirement or the financial plan, involves determining how much revenue your utilities need to raise in order to cover their various costs. The second phase is the cost of service analysis. This really gets at looking at that revenue requirement and figuring out how much of that each customer class should pay. And then the third phase is designing rates, a series of fixed and volume charges to generate the revenue from each class. As we discussed last time, we were really focused on the first phase last time, and we're coming back to that this time. What we talked about with the revenue increases and kind of everything else that's been going on, skipping the second phase where we start kind of shifting costs from class to class and just base the rates on the current revenue allocation. And then the rate design, we talked about making some revisions to the rate structure to help simplify the administration and mitigate some of the impacts that you have been hearing about from your customers. So the system development charge update, general summary of the methodology here is we look at the cost of the utility infrastructure, both the existing system cost as well as the cost of future capital projects. And then we divide that cost by the system capacity in equivalent residential units or residential equivalents, basically trying to equate customers to a single family home. So if you've got a Walmart or something, like you find some way to equate them to a single family equivalent. And it varies. For water and sewer, it's based on the size of the water meter, generally speaking. And then for stormwater, it's based on impervious surface area.
We had a question on that, though, because I know that the last, the system development charges significantly changed in the water area, right?
Yes.
Is it because the way that you guys viewed, or somebody kind of viewed, my understanding was some of the Tacoma capacity that we bought.
So
one of the main drivers behind that.
So actually, a couple of slides, I actually have a previous calculation for comparative purposes. So I think we can speak to it there.
Sure. Thank you.
And so just to provide a brief history of the water SDCs, this is showing the system development charge that a 3/4 inch single family connection would pay. And so going back to 2009, it was $7,700. In general, city policy has provided for inflationary adjustments to the charges. There was a period in 2012 where there was a temporary reduction that was intended to recognize the impacts of the recession and help spur development. That was a temporary reduction that then by 2013 it was back to the normal track. And then the current SDC for water has been in place since 2014, at which time the inflationary adjustments were suspended. And so really, this is showing the water system development charge calculation with a little more detail than I showed last time. There are a fair number of numbers, and I don't want to necessarily get too bogged down in the individual numbers, but just to explain kind of where it all comes from. We start out with the cost of the existing system. It's documented in your financial records. The city maintains records of the capital assets for each utility. And then we take out a provision for asset retirements, and that's to do with the capital plan. And there are some capital projects that will replace existing assets. And so we don't want to double charge somebody for an asset and its replacement at the same time. So that's what that adjustment is for. We include up to 10 years of interest on assets, and that's allowed under statute. And then we take out net outstanding debt principal. So we look at how much debt does the utility have minus any cash that could be used to pay that debt. And so the thought there is we're trying to make sure that we're not charging somebody for an asset through the system development charge that then they will pay for again through the debt that's included in the rate. So we're really trying to avoid double charging. And so we have our existing cost basis there. We have our future cost basis just below, and that's really defined by the capital improvement plan. And we would leave out anything that was going to be funded by grants or developer contributions, just really the utility share of the cost. And so we have our total cost, and then we divide by our system capacity and residential equivalents to get our charge per residential equivalent. And so to answer Councilmember Swatman's question on the decrease, what you can see is that the biggest difference is not even so much in the cost basis. I mean, we're looking overall at a cost basis that's higher than we were back in 2008 when the last calculation, that $7,700 number was calculated. The biggest difference is actually in the denominator. And so looking back into it, the 2008 calculation used a near-term growth forecast in residential equivalents from the 2005 water system plan. And so based on that, it looked at growth over the 6-year capital project period. What we've tried to do in more recent analyses over the past few years is better align the denominator with how many residential equivalents can the system serve. And so, we're not just saying how much growth is going to happen over the 6-year planning period. It's looking at how much capacity you have and how much you're currently using based on your current customer base, and then figure out, how much can the system grow? And so what we found out is based on the updated estimates from the 2017 plan and comparing it to the average of 2019 through 2022 maximum day demand, because that's generally the constraining capacity requirement for the water system, we found out that the system could grow by 74%. And so we take our existing meter equivalents and then we increase it by the 74%, and that gives us our denominator for the fire and other components of the current calculation. And so if you look at those, it's over 30,000 residential equivalents that the system can serve, compared to a little more than half that used as the denominator in the previous calculation. So that's really the big factor contributing to the decrease. But if you had to talk to someone about this who was challenging the fee, you say your equitable share is, here's the cost of the total system, here's how many residential equivalents it can serve. And so that's, I think the decrease is going to be more defensible from that perspective.
Well, yeah, but what's the actual numbers that we're looking at then? You're looking at going from that 9,900 number or that 9,000 number to the 5,300 number?
Yes.
Right. So, and that was my challenge before, was because I don't know how much of that Tacoma water supply issue, did you mention the 30,000 people that you could serve with that? Is it, how much of a driver is that? Because I think you mischaracterized the Tacoma water supply. That's my contention.
Okay.
Because the Tacoma water supply, I don't know if you used in your calculation the 4 million MPG or whatever we have out there, 4.2, right?
That was the one that was embedded in the previous calculation.
Because that, we didn't buy that for an ongoing, like, use it all the time, every day kind of thing, right? We bought a lot of that on the assumption that we could use it when we had to use it, type of an issue, right?
Yes. And so what this calculation, the one on the right, did was it took that purchase and it put it in the cost basis, and then the denominator, it reflected the anticipated. It is only growth that was being allocated to. And so if you look at the supply component of the prior calculation and the supply component of the current calculation, those numbers are not that different. I mean, 16,000, 13,000. I mean, it's the same order of magnitude, that growth that can be served by that capacity. The other numbers are really coming from, talking to the engineers that worked on the system plan and figuring out, what is the combined maximum day demand of the system?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the larger number comes from.
How's there a $4,000 swing in that?
Well, part of the part of what gets you there is the fact that with the inflationary adjustments, you are already more than $1,000 over the last calculated charge. And so inflation is, the inflationary adjustments are trying to approximate, like if you're adding stuff and accruing interest, it's a rough approximation. And if you do it for multiple years, there's a chance you can overshoot the mark on that. So there's a little bit of that going on. But otherwise, it's looking at, the denominator for the current, the last calculation was based on current plus 6 years of growth based on the capital plan. And so, after talking to the engineers this time around and figuring out how many residential equivalents the system can serve, it's a much higher number. So it's not growth over the capital projects that are going to be able to benefit growth
Well,
over.
where is that number that's the number of that it can be served, the system can serve today? That's the supply number?
Part of it, the number, so the supply number on the current calculation represents the growth. So that's only the growth portion. And then the others represent growth and existing. Without complicating it too much more than it already is, the fire denominator is weighted by fire flow requirements. So that's why it's different than the other denominator. But looking at the supply, that's just the growth. That's the 74% growth over the existing meter equivalents. And so I think it was based on looking at the average of the 2019 through 2022 maximum day demand versus the capacity of the system. And I think it was around, Ryan, I don't know if you know off the top of your head, it was like 9,200 gallons per minute or something, like the capacity of the system. And so comparing the existing maximum day demand to that capacity constraint is where we got the 74% growth.
Is available.
That is available, yes. But that is in excess of what you're currently using based on that average maximum day demand.
Yeah, I'm sure we're kind of hung up on this one. Because it's like, again, I think it's mischaracterizing some of our sources. Because I think that the assumption is that they're available to serve our customers on an ongoing basis, and that's not what they're there for. Because we've had cross connections with multiple utilities and still have them, and I think if you throw that into the equation, that you're saying that our ability to serve is way above what it really is. I don't think there's a 74% growth in that system, but you're just using engineering numbers. But that's right. You only have the numbers supplied to you, so
Yes.
I don't know.
And that was the specific question that I asked. So it's like, hey, how many ERUs can the system serve?
Yeah, but you're asking another mathematician and an engineer to be worse. They're always going to say, "Oh, we want a 2-factor safety thing on this." It's like, oh no, you don't need that when you're talking dollars and cents.
Acronym, ERU.
Equivalent residential unit. Thank you.
Slower?
Equivalent residential unit. And so for your terminology, it's actually residential equivalence.
Okay.
That's just more of the generic term that we use in the industry.
So if my fellow council members don't follow me too well on my little rabbit trail, it's the fact that the lower that you have your ability to fund future growth, if you're underfunding that's going to come back on your ratepayers eventually. So
you're talking about how it's decreased significantly from the.
Well, we were, or maybe we are today, charging $9,995 for an SDC.
Yes.
And the new calculations show us we're only supposed to charge $53.04. But that's why I argue with that number, because I think some of the inputs to that number may be mischaracterized slightly, because then there's going to be a $4,000 delta between those two numbers. So that if one of the, maybe that's why you do these calculations, they change over a period of time. But
one thing I do want to make clear in asking the engineer for the estimate, I specifically did not want to get into what population growth they assumed and everything, because engineering conservatism is estimate high so that you have enough capacity to serve stuff. Financial conservatism is estimate low so that you actually reflect who's going to connect and how much revenue you get.
Yeah, right.
What the engineers gave me was based on the water rights that the city has
Yeah,
as a
that's,
representation.
and that's why I think, and I don't know how much a factor is throwing a full 4.2 million gallons from Tacoma in there is mischaracterizing that supply, because that's not how we use that.
Okay.
Chris, can you tell us which engineer gave the estimate so we know?
It
Jerry
was
online.
it was Harley Sandoval at RH2. And so, I mean, that might be something that we have to follow up on.
Yeah, no worries.
That's an emergency use, right? Not a,
Well, some of it is clearly, right?
Yeah.
Some required, but not.
but yeah, we're like you said, we're not, it shouldn't be factored. My savings account shouldn't be factored into my income or a credit check. That's there for my emergency. That's not there for my,
Everyday use.
yeah.
Some of it, yeah.
All right. Any other questions or comments on the water SEC? It sounds like we might not be able to fully agree on what to do with that tonight, but at the very least, I wanted you to better understand how we got to the difference. And now it's,
This this takes into effect capital projects, right?
yes.
So I believe, I don't know that anyone here would say that we're overfunding capital projects as we speak.
Yeah,
Well,
it hasn't.
You don't want to go down that rabbit trail, do you?
I don't think we are. I mean, based on,
Most of the water projects, in my opinion, that I look at are pretty accurate. But there are a significant amount of projects that are, their cost projections are over what they could be.
would you say that
That's always
the
the way it is.
$9,000 we're currently charging is over? I only ask because looking at,
He's looked at the numbers.
we're looking at water rates and everything, which would be the next thing after the SDC.
Yeah.
That has to factor in. So I can't imagine flashing 45% off of our SDC rate is going to lower the water rate.
Yeah, I don't.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
But
Yeah.
we'll see, I guess, what slide.
Well, but they're based on math and cost, right? So if his numbers are more accurate, then those are the numbers you need to use. You just want to make sure that all your numbers are right. You're not mixing your savings and checking account.
Right. Yeah. And that's, math is math, but the input is what's the variable, right?
Yeah.
The output is determined, but
Yeah.
whatever we're providing them is what they're giving us. But I just see a hard time cutting that, which would be great for new builders. But long term, I just wouldn't want to
Sure. Yeah.
necessarily.
That's why you got to make sure. Yeah.
Okay, so then here we'll go on to the sewer system development charge. Similarly, there were a series of inflationary adjustments beginning in 2009. There was a temporary decrease in November of 2012 to spur growth due to the recession. We looked at the SDC in the 2017 rate study, and then the council adopted it in effective May 1st of 2019. And so that 11,606 per residential equivalent is the charge that's currently in place, and it's been that way since 2019. And so here we are looking at the current calculation versus the previous calculation. A lot of the same components as what I discussed on the water system development charge slide. One of the differences is that looking at the 2017 calculation, we split the charge between treatment and conveyance to recognize the treatment plant is also constrained by strength. So basically, it's not just the flow; it's also the strength of the stuff that goes. Where the conveyance system is really driven by flow, and so we had two different denominators. What we did for the current calculation was we said, okay, which is the constraining factor? So if you can only serve 11,000 residential equivalents based on the strength capacity at the treatment plant, then that sort of defines how many equivalent customers you can serve. And then the other adjustment we made was that once the city gets to 85% utilization of its capacity, it needs to start planning a capacity expansion. And so the CIP does not include that capacity expansion. So we reduced the denominator by the 15% to recognize, once you get to that threshold, then there are going to be additional costs in there that are not currently in there. And so with that, there is a slight increase over the current charge of $11,606, $100 so dollars. But that's effectively what we were seeing on the sewer SDC side. Were there any questions about that?
Well, to Mr. Johnstone, how close are we to that 85%?
85% capacity?
Yeah.
I'm not sure at this point. I'd have to check in both with, as far as our collection and conveyance system is concerned, we're not close to 85%. The 85% we need to be really aware of is the 85% treatment capacity down at the plant, because that's the one that's going to really hurt us if we get to a certain point and we're bumping up against that.
Is that what the city of Sumner is concentrating on improving the wastewater treatment plant right now?
So whenever they do upgrades to the plant, it's because some component of that treatment plant has reached that 85% capacity. And right now that would be one of the main triggers for the biosolids upgrade that they're running into.
Okay.
All right, so then on to stormwater system development charges. The current charge reflects inflationary adjustments since January of 2012. And we did not look at the stormwater SDCs in our 2017 rate study. So it's just been those inflationary adjustments to the current level of $571 per residential equivalent. And so here we didn't have a previous calculation to compare to. So this was, again, just the calculation we went over in November. But basically, we're looking at a charge of around $1,600 compared to the existing charge of $571 per equivalent service unit, which is what ESU stands for. And to simplify that, basically, it's the estimated impervious footprint of a single-family home. So if you think about kind of the typical area of a single-family parcel and what of that is covered by stuff that rain doesn't get through, and that generates runoff that then the city has to manage.
Well, really? Because when I'm building, I'm required to manage my runoff 100% on my property. So that language is a little bit interesting, right? It's the citywide kind of system, and your impact on the citywide system more than, because I know I've paid for $30,000 worth of infiltration system on my lot to guarantee it doesn't go anywhere else.
Certainly from a water quality perspective, though, regardless of what you're disposing from on your property, you are still creating impacts to the storm system in other ways.
Through your driving and through sidewalk and different things like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I do think it's important to point out that when we consider our stormwater utility being the third enterprise fund that we have of our utility systems, we are at an inflection point. That utility from a staffing perspective is incredibly understaffed, and that is largely because that utility doesn't generate the funding it needs to sustain itself. So we consequently are pulling employees from other divisions within Public Works to help maintain the stormwater system.
That's the ongoing charge as opposed to the SDC, right?
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah. And then this charge is based on the cost of the infrastructure that provides system-wide stormwater.
There you go. Very good.
So just to restate the comparison, I mean, we go from the existing charge is toward the upper middle part of the range, and the updated charges would bring you down below Anacortes, and then sort of more toward the middle of the range. I'll give you a second to reflect on that, but first I wanted to spend a little bit of time covering why is the sewer system development charge so much higher than these other utilities. That question came up, so I did some research on that, and there were a few themes that were recurring, and so the first one is economies of scale. So larger systems can spread the cost over more more residential equivalents or equivalent residential units, and so looking at the charge per equivalent residential unit for Auburn and Bremerton and Puyallup, I mean, they have way more residential equivalents than the city does. And so the cost of providing a treatment plant and conveyance infrastructure to serve those increased equivalent customers, it doesn't go up linearly. And so the smaller systems, there is a premium that you have to pay because there's that fixed cost of having that infrastructure in place.
If we joined with Sumner, we could cut our costs by 50%.
I can't make a guarantee about that, but in general, like if you were to connect your entire systems and unify your infrastructure, you might be able to. But at the very least, right now you have your system, and we discussed this a lot last time with all the pump stations and everything that are required. Like if for some reason you were theoretically able to merge with the Sumner system, you'd be spreading those costs over all the ERUs of Sumner and Bonnie Lake, where right now it's the ERUs or the equivalent units of Bonnie Lake. And so that's one of the reasons why that's higher. Another contributor is the timing of the last calculation. So some of the jurisdictions, particularly those at the lower end, have not updated their charges in years. So on the rate side, you generally have to keep your rates relatively current, because if you don't, you can't pay your bills. With the system development charges, you don't have that pressure. I mean, you have the right to recover an equitable share of the cost of your infrastructure, but there's not necessarily a firm methodology for defining that. I mean, there are those that we use in the industry, but it could be a 20-year-old definition. It could be out of date, and it's like, okay, so let's say the cost of our system is $11,000 per residential equivalent, and we choose to recover $6,000 per residential equivalent. I mean, it's a policy decision, basically, of how much you want to recover from development. And so if that calculation hasn't been updated, that's another reason why some of them might be low. There are also methodology differences. And so some of the calculations don't include future replacement projects in their cost basis. So they say, here's your existing assets over your total equivalent units. And then you look at the future part, and here's the growth portion, and we allocate that only to growth. And so we don't, when you have the older systems that are mostly renewal and replacement of infrastructure, those costs don't get into the system development charge.
So Sumner, you're saying that Sumner doesn't account for that?
I'm saying Sumner's methodology does not include those replacement projects in the charge, at least until they're done and they're booked as existing assets. But that, by looking at the capital plan for the city and the relative replacement needs, I mean, we are recovering those in the charge. The other approach would be to leave them out and then to just include the existing assets as they are, but then that's going to recover less.
For these SDCs, to be clear again, that we calculate what we could charge, because there's a legal umbrella over that. You can't just simply charge anything you want to charge.
Correct.
But yet you can charge less, of
Yes.
course, because nobody's going to usually complain about you charging less.
Yes.
So again, they're not, the max isn't, it's not arbitrarily set. I guess that's a calculated, legalistic kind of,
Yeah. So in general, I mean, and I have clients that have done that. They calculate their charge and it's $8,000 per residential equivalent, and they're like, we're going to do 4. And that's, that's what we're going to get.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I don't think any developer in the land is going to challenge them for that.
Because if you're telling us 8, we can't, we want to charge 12.
Exactly.
Then we're probably going to get in trouble.
Then you better charge 8 or less. Yeah.
Okay.
And then the last point I'd raise up there, differences in funding sources. I mean, we generally exclude assets that were funded by grants or developer contributions. And so to the extent in their charge, where, for, the City of Bonnie Lake calculation, only 12% of the asset costs that we have in the record appear to come from developer sources. So there's a greater share that the utilities had to fund, and then the stuff that we've identified as being funded by developers, we take out. But to the extent that there's a difference there, that can also contribute to it. So there are a few factors as to why the sewer charge is as high as it is, but hopefully
can you go back to the last slide?
Oh,
please.
Yes.
Okay. When you say, okay, ours is 12%, relatively low compared to other jurisdictions, how relatively low compared to other jurisdictions? Do you know that number, or is that just, or are you just saying that?
So I don't have all of them at my fingertips. I can say from experience in Sumner, where I calculated their system development charges, their contributed share was about 50.
50 versus 12.
Yeah. So that would be one reason why, if you've got that differential of 38%, so to speak, that is in your charge and it's not in theirs.
And when you say some jurisdictions haven't updated their SDC numbers, do we know which jurisdictions those are? The ones on the screen now, or?
So I would say, at the very least, I can say Puyallup and Fife have not updated their charges in some time. I mean, Bainbridge Island, their charge, we calculated in 2018, and we're actually just wrapping up an update where it's going to go up pretty substantially. And then, yeah, I think for Sumner, we're probably going to be, we did that, I think, in 2020. And we'll be, I think, potentially talking about updating that sometime soon. But yeah, so I think the one sort of the lower end, it's been at least a few years. I think Fife and Puyallup, I mean, I can't speak to when their calculation was updated, but at least based on the research I did, I couldn't find the last time that they formally put those in place. So, I mean, it's been at least 5-10 years.
So that previous slide that the mayor referenced with the 12% on there, because we've always had significantly high, costly sewer SDCs. Was there a time that Bonnie Lake wasn't charging SDCs? Or why were we only at the 12 instead of like 40 or 50%? Right?
That I can't speak to.
So, because see, I'm scratching my head thinking, well, what did, we pay for that the developers didn't? Because there's only been a few items recently that I'm aware of that, small stuff that city did that could have been done by developers.
Or there is a more, I'm going to say, Ryan was able to provide a record of the assets the developers contributed from, I think it was 2010 or 11.
2009.
2009 on. And so there was a lot of stuff before that point that the utility funded, and the things that were identified as contributed, we've taken those out of the calculation.
Wow.
Did you ever?
We'll have to chat.
I can speak a little bit to that. So there's a change in accounting principles, and all of the cities had to go out and figure out exactly how much sewer line, all of the assets. And so a lot of smaller cities weren't tracking how much developers contributed because we never needed to do that until the change in accounting principle, which I believe was in 2008. I believe in 2009, we paid for a company to come in and guesstimate, or 2008, guesstimate how much we have of everything.
And admittedly, like some of the older stuff, it's like, who knows? But it's like, I mean, it doesn't necessarily make sense to take an arbitrary guess as to, oh, well, this was donated. But
sure,
it's really like, what do the records show? And that's
right.
what we're trying to account for. So it's the best that we can do with the information that's available.
Oh, and just out of curiosity, did you ever find out what the anomaly in Buckley's stormwater?
Oh, yes. I looked into that one.
Yeah.
The conclusion I could draw from it is it was based on a massive capital plan, or at least for the size of their system.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I can tell, it doesn't necessarily look like they actually have done that project yet. But yeah, I mean, and that's one of the reasons why when we set these charges, we really want to make sure that the capital plan is realistic and that we're not basing the charge on a wish list that never gets done.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, like they had, I mean, it was a plan, I think it was around 2008, if I'm remembering correctly. And there were just a whole series of projects that were supposed to be done and divided by however many equivalent units the system had. And it seemed to roughly check out, but I think they just had a big plan. And I think that what some utilities might do is they might look at establishing a local sort of charge that only applies in the benefit area of like a major mitigation facility. But for them, I mean, that's just kind of their system-wide what they've done. So again, that's something else that they can play into it. I can't speak to exactly whether all of these utilities do it or not, but there are utilities that if there's a major facility, they'll try to make that more of a localized charge as to who pays it, and then it keeps it out of the main charge that would appear in this. All right, so I think that is SDCs. Are there any other questions on that? I will say that for the water financial plan,
page 1,
we've assumed the lower SDC. So, I mean, it won't be any worse than what I'm going to show you. So just to reiterate the assumptions, we haven't really changed any of the planning assumptions since our meeting in November. General cost inflation, we're assuming, and this is beyond the current budget, we're assuming that things go down to more long-term averages, and that's consistent with the state's forecast. We're looking at about 3%. And then benefits and construction costs going up at slightly higher rates than that. The operating forecast is based on the 2023-2024 budget. And then we have reserve policies maintaining or an operating reserve equal to at least 8% of budgeted expenses for each utility. And then we have our growth assumptions, which last time we did discuss that there are potentially more residential equivalents in the pipeline based on some current development projects. To be conservative, we haven't made an assumption on the timing of those, but these are intended to be averages. So you might have a spike now or within the next year or so, and then it might tail off after that. But it's something that can be revisited every couple of years just to make sure that that we're on track. And especially now with conditions as they are and the uncertainty around them, it would definitely be good to revisit this and not just walk away for 5 years and then say, how did we do?
That operating reserve at 8%, where does that come from?
That is city policy, the city's financial policies in the budget document.
Yep. Is there any other document, recommended practice type stuff that you've seen against that or something?
It varies. I mean, most commonly, I'd say we talk about it in terms of number of days of operating expenses. And so stormwater, I think that really depends on how often you bill. But I think the stormwater rates are billed as part of the regular utility bill. So I think that should be fine. Where if we looked at someone that they bill through their county and they're only getting revenue twice a year, they might need a larger reserve that could be 100, 150 days.
Well, it's kind of like savings, though, right? Isn't it kind of a static number? Once you get it, you got it, kind of thing?
Yeah. So, I mean, well, it changes with the operating expenses, but in general,
Just a bucket that gets bigger over time?
as your budget grows, yeah, as a percentage of that, it grows. And part of it is what it's trying to get at is, what is your cash flow cycle?
Do we have an idea of what we have today? What do we have there, right? $0.3 million.
Days, right?
Yeah, so 8% is about, I think that works to about 30 days, which especially for water is kind of low. We're not managing exactly to that amount, but at the very least, we want to make sure that we don't project going lower than that.
Right, yeah. But if, what do we have today? Just FYI.
Are you asking physically how much reserve we have?
I guess, right? If we have 8%, it's plus or minus. Right?
Well, I mean, we have more money in our budget, right? So we don't have that set aside as an actual reserve. If we ran a lower cash flow, kind of like Chris was talking about, then we would definitely want to set that money aside for a reserve.
Okay.
If you look at the budget document, which I could pull up if you need, or I can email you later. But yeah, we definitely have that much money set aside. Our policies for the 8% came from bond reserve policies that were the minimum
Sure.
that would be accepted for us to get some of the bonds.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
All right, so then to the water financial plan. This is the same slide I showed last time. It sort of shows the history. I think the main thing that has changed since November is there was an 8.5% rate increase that went into effect January 1st. And so that we'll talk more about that later. But really the 2017 rate study recommended a series of increases, 8.5% per year through 2023, and it was driven by capital funding need. And so in 2022, that increase was waived pending the current rate study. 2023, that increase was implemented, the 8.5%. And so the water capital needs forecast, we're looking at $36.8 million in projects. There's some grants and cash resources expected to fully cover the cost. So we're not anticipating the need for debt issuance. And then a request from last time to kind of put this graph on a separate sheet just to make it a little bit easier to see. But the darker bars at the bottom are the ongoing operating expenses. There is a slightly lighter color above that. That is the debt service. And then the lighter share is basically what's funding capital on top of operating expenses and debt service. And so, the solid black line represents the revenues at existing rates, and then the dashed line represents the revenue at the projected or proposed rates. And so, for water, I mean, it's really being driven by the need to generate funds to pay for those projects, without borrowing money. And so the rate increase here, so 2023, like I said, we have that 8.5% that's already been done. And then beyond that, we're looking at several years of 5.5%, and then a 1% increase in 2028. The reason why that couldn't be smoothed more was because we get to a kind of a critical fund balance by the end of 2027. So try to smooth that over as much as we could for 2027. And then once the major capital projects are done, then we're able to go back to something inflationary or below. So any questions about the financial plan before we get into the rate structure?
Well, I don't know if it's pertinent at this point, but because you mentioned about not incurring debt.
Yes. So we ran a scenario last time where we borrowed money, and you could potentially get the rate increases down to around 4% per year. And so that is something we could bring back if there is interest in doing that.
But I feel like this is something we had talked about before where, yes, it would, curb it and lower it now, but then eventually, I mean, doesn't it then make it so that we have to increase later? Like all it's doing is stalling.
It is. I mean, what it would help you do is it would help you smooth things like a bit. And we would borrow, like, let's say $8 million.
Mm-hmm.
That's money that doesn't have to be raised over the next few years, but you're paying it over a longer period of time. And then at some point, as bond coverage becomes an issue, then it limits the financial flexibility that you have to mitigate or use reserves to phase things in. I believe, my understanding has been there's been an aversion to materially increasing indebtedness, just given the current debt load, particularly for the sewer utility. And so the question is, do we want to borrow to shave maybe 1% or 2% off the rate increases?
That's just a philosophical argument.
It is.
Right.
And so we can certainly say, yeah, let's look at a bond issue and see how far we can get those increases down. But I think the conclusion, or at least the impression that I got, was, the savings wasn't material enough given the debt that you would have to borrow to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm hearing that you could, instead of having an 8 and a 5 and a 6, a 6, 6, 6, you could have a 4, 4, 4, 4 across.
Well, the 8.5 is done already. So that's there. So you'd be looking at 5.5s, and it might be a little bit lower. It might be 4s or 3.5s, but yeah, it would be about that.
Mm-hmm.
31.5% over 5 years is the increase. We're increasing by nearly a third over the next 5 years. We've already increased.
Did you do a
Mm-hmm. It is worse.
And can you go back a couple slides to what was passed in 2017? On top of the 25.5% that was already done. So the rates will go up over 50% since 2019. From 2019. So for the next 10 years, we've increased our rates by 50%. 5 years past, 5 years forward.
And I think when considering that, it's worth taking note of what the CIP has had in it over these last few years and over the next 2 bienniums as well. We're kind of in an extraordinary period where our CIP is concerned because we've got 3 reservoirs that we're having to construct due to some potential regulatory issues with the Department of Health. We're storage deficient. Yeah. So those projects are required to get done. And at, using round numbers, $8 million a pop, that's $24 million in reservoir construction alone.
Yeah.
We don't foresee that level of CIP effort out beyond 2026. So I just call that out call attention to that, because that's, if it were not for those projects, I don't think that we would quite be seeing what it is, what we're seeing now as far as the necessary rate increase.
I think that's what causes the confusion with us here is we're dropping STC charges on water by $4,000, but yet we're increasing another 31% on water. We're not even talking sewer yet on that. I mean, where is the balance in that from what he's saying, the $4,000 drop? I mean, if we kept it at where it is, I mean, mathematically, if that were really where, you know, taking out the Tacoma water, what would that do with these rates? You know, it's one of those unknowns, right, until you actually study it. But that's where I don't think anyone could understand a $4,000 drop in that, knowing that these are going up as much as they are.
Well, I mean, the thing to kind of restate on that front is the 4,000 drop is based on what is the current estimate of an equitable share of cost. Has nothing to do with rates or how much impact it would have to rates. It's really, this is what development should pay based on the cost of your system, how many residential equivalents it can serve, and then the rates. I mean, it impacts the rates, but it's a cost recovery tool, not a revenue generation tool. So that's the thing to keep remembering on that.
And I will just add briefly, Chris, I was looking very quickly while that just was being discussed about the SDCs for water, and Table 7.9 in the water system plan does include the wholesale water as part of that system capacity number. So I think there may be something there we can go back and take a look at. Just putting a pin in that.
So over the next 3 years, we have, how many years do we have for the $24 million for the 3 reservoirs?
So we're finishing up the first of the 3 reservoirs now. That's the Tacoma Point Reservoir, excuse me. We've got 2 more to be constructed. One is scheduled for construction in 2024 and one in 26.
Yeah, and we had like $11 million in the budget for that. Is that what we have?
In this biennium,
Yeah.
we have specifically for that project, I think it's closer to about $8 million.
Okay. All right. Okay. So anyway, so that's development cost. Is that maintenance or development cost?
They're not. It's not new, is it?
Well, it's there's many things that determine the sizing of a reservoir, and it's not all strictly related to development. When you're considering the size of reservoirs, not to get too far down in the weeds, but there's also needs for fire suppression and standby and equalization storage. There's a whole list of things that go into sizing a reservoir. So it's not fair to necessarily say it's all strictly the need for those is based solely on just development. There's other needs that factor into that as well. But certainly when we're talking about storage, I mean, this is storage that has to serve all of the city. So I mean, development is a component of that.
Yeah, because I'm just kind of trying to rationalize in my head that we're lowering the burden for the development, but we're raising the individual burden.
And that's
for the maintenance. And I'm like, but it sounds like after 2027, we're not going to have the burden.
Reservoirs.
Right, with the reservoirs.
I think for the sake of the conversation tonight, not to use a phrase I just phrased, but I think where the SDC conversation is concerned, there's a couple of things that Chris and I need to go back and take a look at before I think we get too hung up on that number. So I think I'd like to ask for a little bit of time there before I know we're not going to make any final decisions tonight anyway. So I think it would be wise to maybe take another look at that before we say for certain that's exactly what's going to happen.
Well, so the other aspect of that I thought I wanted to think about was the SDCs are the rate increases are harder to reduce, right? Because once they go forward, we'd have to do like the 2012. We'd probably have to do it'd be a pretty big rate adjustment to go down, right? And I don't think the comfort level for that is anybody really has that comfort level, but the volatility of the SDCs is probably less. You're less sensitive to that because it's more. It's not quite as. It's not compounding is what I that's not the right term, but it just seems like the rate increases compound over time, where the SDCs are, they impact the development costs for that point in time, right?
I believe Ms. Ryerson actually wanted to address that. I know we can't see her in the screen over there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out that we're going to bring back the SDC discussion and then the actual rate discussion. What Chris really wanted to talk about tonight is the rate structure, which is the next portion. So if we could kind of maybe pause this part of the discussion so he can work on the structure, which was requested by council, the consideration of changing the summer tiers, et cetera. He has that coming up next. And some good news.
And some good news.
Really?
Yes, and some good news. So, drum roll, hang tight, listen to this, and then you'll get the good news.
No pressure, Chris.
Okay, so here is just an overview of your current water rate structure. There is a fixed charge or a base charge that increases with water meter size. Generally speaking, every customer class pays it except irrigation meters. And then there is a seasonal block structure that in the winter, there's 2 blocks, 0 to 10, 100, basically 0 to 1,000 cubic feet or 100 cubic feet is what CCF is by month, per month, or 20 bi-monthly. And so there's one rate, and then there's a higher rate if you go above that. During the summer months, there are now 4 blocks, and the rate goes up quite a bit more during those summer months. And so these reflect the 8.5% increase that passed effective January 1st. And the current issues, there are significant bill increases to some customers during the summer months. And so back in November, I think we had at least two customers in the audience that were commenting on their bill being hundreds of dollars more from one billing period to the next. And this is part of that. And then also there's the complexity of administering the structure as well as keeping it relatively easy for customers to understand. And I believe there was an issue switching the summer rates on last year that then had to be corrected. And so just for administrative reasons as well as these impacts, we talked about making some changes. So this is what I shall present to you. The base charges are the exact same as the ones on the previous slide. We're not recommending any changes to that. As far as the volume charges go, we're saying get rid of the seasonal rate differentials for everybody, like no more winter summer rates. For single family, we would have a 3-block structure. And so what we did there to come up with those tiers is we said, okay, what is the winter average water consumption of a single family home? And that defines kind of that first block cutoff as representative of indoor usage. And so that turned out to be 10 CCF bi-monthly or 5 CCF per month. The second tier cutoff of 17, that was based on summer average use. And that is representative of indoor plus outdoor average use. And then everything above that would be subject to that highest tier rate. And then, so single family, 3-block structure, all other classes, a uniform rate that does not change with the amount of water used or the time of year. And so the understanding here for multifamily and commercial, to a slightly lesser extent, there's not really a whole lot of peaking. You also have lots of tenants that don't see their bills directly. So, block structures they offer conservation pricing incentives, and they work best for single family. They use water pretty much the same way. They have that peak usage in the summer, and you can target it with the block structure. Multifamily and commercial, they don't peak as much, and then they generally don't see the bill directly. And then irrigation is sort of the opposite. They're almost all peaking, so it's like, is there a benefit to having a lower winter rate when they barely use any water during the winter months?
Now, when you say that they don't see their bill directly, do you mean that it's incorporated into their rent?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so the landlord would get the bill, and then they would basically work it into the rent paid, and so they don't see a separate component for their water. And I think that covers the basic. Except the other thing here I have is the outside city rates we have set to 1.5 times the inside city rate. The existing rate structure is close to that, but not quite that.
I think over the years, it's just kind of deviated due to rounding of the rates. And so just saying, a differential of 25 to 50% is common. And so right now, I'd say it's roughly 1.46 or something like that. So just saying, 1.5 times inside city rates. And that's what we see here.
Do you have a side by side of kind of the change in the structure? And you're saying inside the city, that's what they're paying. Outside the city,
Yes.
that's what they're paying. Okay.
Yeah.
And I see that you've created 3 tiers, and then you have the ones that just kind of stay fixed at the
Yeah.
bottom. Correct? Okay.
That's correct.
And so then
So here, this is the existing structure, and it shows this is the same structure that applies to all the customer classes. Irrigation, I think they only pay a winter and a summer rate. And I think it's pegged to that. But generally speaking, that volume rate structure everybody pays. And so what happens is for multifamily, you have to scale up the tiers based on the number of dwelling units, because otherwise, they almost all their usage is at that highest rate. And so it's another complexity that isn't really that helpful. And so getting rid of the tiers for multifamily really simplifies things.
She said, do you have a side-by-side that would show?
Yeah, I'm seeing the $1.95.
Average family today versus an average family tomorrow?
So actually, I will show you that we do have sample bill impacts. And so what you're looking at here, this is for a Lifeline user, a single family home that doesn't use very much water. You can see the columns represent the bi-monthly usage, and then the bills at on the solid black line, those are under the existing rates, and then the purple, the dashed line, those are the updated rates. So they would see a slight increase in their bill from month to month. But
for the people that don't use water that much.
Yeah, these are people that don't use water that much.
Okay.
And so then we'll get to the more interesting one in just a second.
What I'm having a problem with is that I know that if somebody doesn't use any water at all, period, like they're gone out of town for a month, 2 months during the summer or whenever, they have a minimum charge of $120. So these numbers are not accurate to me, because if you're going to charge $120 base, then this is on top of that, what you're using. So there's no way somebody's going to get a $59 water bill if they have to pay $120.
So this is, first of all, just water bill.
Yeah.
So this doesn't include the sewer bill. This is mainly trying to isolate what are the impacts of the water rate change and to the water bill. But yes, you are correct. The bill that they would see would be a bi-monthly bill for water and sewer, and storm as well.
We're not going to do bi-monthly anymore, though, are we? Aren't we going
I think
to
there was
monthly?
talk about.
Trying to go to
Yeah.
Working on it.
We're working on it. It's still the
much do you wanna
ability to
pay?
get all the rates done in.
I just feel like if we can do it monthly, then that's going to help decrease the impact, and it's not going to necessarily decrease the rate, but it's going to,
Oh, it'll increase the rate, yeah.
but you're not going to have the fluctuation every other month of sewerville versus sewer and water, sewer and water.
Yeah.
We've got to make it easier for families to function and to live and be able to pay their bills. I mean, God forbid, like, people can't do laundry and take a shower.
Chris, can we get a copy of this when you're all done?
Sure. I emailed it this morning. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It'd be nice to look more detail. Thank you.
Did we play with the availability charge?
No. So I did not change that for water. Sewer, I'll talk about in a little bit. But the water-based charge, I assume that we would keep that at the existing level, because especially with the high capital costs, not wanting to materially make the revenue more volatile. Like if we were to decrease the base rate and then put it on the volume charges, that makes the revenue more unpredictable.
Because our base rate, does that include any water?
It does not.
120 doesn't include water.
Well,
That's
water
only
is not,
for sewer?
But sewer does not. Sewer, there's a base charge, and then there is a volume charge that goes up currently to 10 CCF per month.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but sewer, this is only the water-based charge plus the water volume charges. And I mean, the point that Ryan made last time is the water bill is not that high. It's really the sewer bill that's high and that's driving a lot of those comments.
Part of the problem is the volume, though, because we're charging people to put water into their house at a specific rate, but they're getting charged a sewer rate and a water rate that goes into the house, correct?
If they receive water and sewer service, yeah, I mean, they are both billed on their water consumption.
With that volume, so basically they're already paying sewer rates, even though half of that water probably isn't going to go down into Sumner.
So that's where the city policy of capping the use at 10 CCF that's where what it's trying to address. So as the usage peaks in the summer, anything above 10 CCF doesn't get charged the sewer rate.
Right. Okay.
All right. So the more interesting case is, what about a high water user? And so this is a user that peaks a lot in the summer. And so what you can see here is that particularly during the July, August, and September, October billing cycles, their current rates are a lot higher. They would see a significant reduction in their bill during those months. And so you can see the purple is lower. And I think it's roughly this account would be roughly $1,000 savings in their total annual bill, like for all of this usage here.
Mm-hmm.
This is in city, is that what?
This is in city.
Okay.
And so what we tried to do for the purpose of this comparison is we took a group of users and averaged their usage. So this is sort of an average high water user. So it's not pick on a specific account, but to give you an order.
Used average as opposed to like a median or a mean, or?
Mainly I used an average. I just used a simple mean to come up, mean by billing period. So
it was a mean?
It is a mean by billing period. It's approximating what a typical high user might be like. But I think that the key distinction here is this is a Lifeline user with hardly any peaking, and this is how their bill would change. And then this is really, I think, one of the problems that you've been trying to address for the higher users is, how does we keep their bill from spiraling out of control? And so here we can shave a lot of that off with this alternate structure. Of course, we're also assuming that the same amount of money is collected in aggregate. So these customers pay less, other customers pay more. So that's important to recognize. You seem puzzled.
Yeah. You lost me.
Because after 10
CCFs,
then
this is water.
Lower the sewer.
This is not sewer. And this is only the water bill.
Stick on the water.
Yeah. I've only been on one.
Good.
What I'm saying here is, if you look at this graph, this is the water bill for a high user. You see under the updated rate structure, that purple line is significantly lower than the black.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, other users are going to have to make up that difference because the total revenue that the water utility collects is going to be the same.
Yeah, I was going to wonder that if you ran your scenarios with, like last year's, it's like, okay, what does this rate structure look like? What the revenue against what we billed last year?
So what we did is we looked at we haven't done it based on 2022 data. We had 2021 data, and we reconciled the billing data to come up with what are our customer counts by class, how much water did they use, and came up with an estimate. And I ran it by Stephanie.
Mm-hmm.
She said, hey, this reasonably represents our system.
Yeah.
And so how much revenue did we get from that?
Right.
And so we designed the rate structure to be revenue neutral to that.
And 2021 being basically the peak of COVID, that did represent typical water usage for our residents?
Yes. We did kind of go over that, Chris, because we also had a lot in arrearages at that time too. So I pointed that out to him. He did make a check based.
Okay. So one thing I will mention, I was trying to figure out the best place to say it, but I'll say it now. So to that point, the last time I was here, I used our typical, because we weren't that far along in that part. So we use our typical methodology where we're looking at 2021 actuals for revenue. And we say, okay, so what's that plus growth and the rate increases, and that's our revenue. Once we got through the customer data, it was showing us some pretty weird stuff. On the water utility, our revenue estimates were about 4.5% high,
Mhm.
and on sewer, they were almost 12% high. And it's like, what is going on here? And then
Yeah.
Stephanie's like, well, yeah, I mean, we're a cash-based utility as far as and so the revenue didn't account for the fact that there were a bunch of customers that were in arrears, which has since been fixed. So the current forecasts represent that 2021, usage data with the rate structure applied to it. It's not tied to the 2021 actual revenues because that was abnormally low due to the arrears. So the sewer forecast is actually better in part because we're now projecting revenues that are 10+% higher than we were doing back in November based on the actual revenue history.
Okay. How did you, you stated there were, what, did you say 500 units or users, high water users? What I'm wondering about is the randomness of the study that you used. Was it over the city, pervasively over the city? Was it?
So are you?
I just like I'm worried about suburban households versus, or brand new that have very fragile landscapes, I guess is the best way to put it, versus our residents who have established water usage versus the $1 million McMansions that we have down on Lake Tapps. How did you get?
So
Yeah.
So for the customer data analysis that we use to project revenues and design the rates, we use the entire customer base.
Okay.
For this graph, I just took a random sampling, and really I was just trying to highlight for a high user, what would this look like? I mean, part of it is I could have spent 40 hours doing bill impacts based on what I thought you might want to see. But I think we can dig further in if there's a specific type of customer you want to see. But for the first round of discussion, I thought this is representative of a high user.
Okay.
Can you go back to the previous slide, please?
How would this affect a mid user then? Because you're saying that, we still have to recover cost. So who's gonna pay the rest of it?
Well, the rest of it would go. Well, it would sort of be. I think maybe an example I can show you is if we go to multifamily.
Okay.
So multifamily. This is a 1.5-inch multifamily connection with 6 dwelling units, and so you can see here the black line is what they pay under the existing rate structure, and then the purple line is under the updated structure. So they would universally pay more. And so for them, I think it amounts to about a $300 increase over the course of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, for a typical single family home, I mean, it would probably be a similar percentage of total. But obviously it'll be a lower dollar amount because, it's a lower scale of usage. But
Well, I mean, this is townhomes, apartments, basically. These are the ones, the bills that they don't see. It's just affected in their rent.
That's right.
Okay.
So in layman's terms, we'll be giving savings to our homeowners, but we're going to be jacking it to the apartment dwellers and the people who live in multi-family residences.
I would be careful saying that because there will be single family homes that also see a big impact. So, that average user is going to see a larger increase.
Because your one graph there, it looks like, the one ahead of behind, right? The one where there's $1,000 worth of delta there between the old and the new rates or what have you that you're going to have to recover someplace because you made a revenue neutral forecast, right?
Yes.
So apparently the multifamily are sucking up like 300 of it, and then you're going to put the rest of the $700 increase on various residential uses.
Maybe, I guess the tough part about it is, think about how many of these high users are there compared to, if you think about a typical single family customer base and how they use water. It's like there's a bell curve. It's like, you get up to your median usage, and then as you have these higher users way out here.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a relatively low percentage of the total. And so let's say we have 20 accounts that use water this way, and there'd be a certain cumulative dollar impact from doing this.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be spreading that over everybody else.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what everybody, we could come up with, here's a histogram and where, this many customers are going to pay this much more. Mm-hmm. And part of it is really, what is the question? I mean, the main point I wanted to make tonight is this is going to be a win for these customers. But when we talk about revenue neutral rate design, there are going to be losers. And, we hope that it isn't going to be too much of an impact, but it will be an impact.
And this is assuming water usage is constant. It's
Yes, this
the
is
same high users and, okay.
Yes, and yeah, I mean, versus, I mean, if their bill goes way down, maybe they might use more water.
Yeah.
And likewise, you might have people who see a higher bill at the low end who maybe try to cut their usage. Water is not as sort of elastic or responsive to price as many other things are. I mean, if there's a major increase, there will be some changes in pattern, but we generally assume that these things sort of balance out with the understanding that if we're looking at this regularly and we see things getting way out of whack, then we can adjust.
Okay, so just kind of stating, just kind of in summary, so everyone, you're saying that the high water users are a small portion of the overall base of water folks. They will receive these significant decreases during a short period of time in their billing. However, everyone else is getting an increase. Does that sound correct?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I want to make sure I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, thinking about the high level concept here, we were trying to shave off those peak summer bills.
Well, you said that's a small portion.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Right?
The
high water
it
users?
is. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head how many would fit this profile. But in general, like the usage pattern, like if we tallied up every bill that you had and showed the different usage levels, you would see kind of a tail on the high end. There are some that use twice as much as this. And then the typical home, I mean, they probably use like an average of, well, I mean, if we go back to what the rate structure looked like, the winter average usage was 10 CCF bi-monthly, and then the summer average was 17 CCF bi-monthly. So the annual average would be somewhere between that.
Okay.
So, maybe 15 CCF bi-monthly.
And those high users are, it's way more.
Yeah, the high user, I mean, they get to almost 200 CCF in one billing cycle. So, and the current rate structure has been really good at giving them the price signal, but at the same time, it also concentrates your revenue to those months. And so, considering most of the costs are fixed, you've got, you're paying employee salaries and benefits and paying for chemicals and things like that. Most of the costs don't jump up in the summer, but that's when you get most of your revenue. And so one of the benefits of this structural change is it's going to flatten out your revenue throughout the year. I mean, there will still be a peak. It'll just be less than it currently is.
So yes, Angela, everyone in our neighborhood is going to be paying grass on lake taps.
Yeah.
To answer that question.
Okay.
Well, you say it's a small amount. I mean, demographically, we have tons of single-family residences that are controlled by homeowners associations who put pressure and fines on people who cannot keep up their their green grass. And so there are other forces out there other than just typical recreational or use that comes to this. So
and I wasn't intending to diminish that. Mainly what I was saying is, if we make this change, there will be a revenue loss from those customers, but I mean, we're effectively spreading that over the majority that don't use as much water as.
Yeah. Okay.
Grandma can afford it. She just got a raise.
I mean, at the end of the day, we're really not doing anything other than just moving the shells around, right?
Yes.
I mean, we're not saving our citizens money. We're saving this group money. We're costing this group money. There's not a overall net deficit of savings across the board.
Correct.
This is just a beautifully graphed out, extremely long shell game that we're looking at doing.
And what slide are we? We have what, 41? Well, how many slides do we have?
I feel like this is the biggest part of the discussion.
Okay.
Let me just get to the good news. And
Yeah, okay. Oh, I thought we did get to the good news.
No. The good news is on sewer.
Oh, okay.
And so effectively, we did all this. So really, the punchline for sewer is we have integrated the change where we reduce the cap for single-family users from 10 to 8 CCF. We estimated that would reduce revenues by 2%. And so we built that into our forecast. And by revisiting the system reinvestment policy, which I'll explain in a second, we're able to reduce the sewer rate. by 12%.
Wow.
And so, and so just to highlight the system reinvestment, basically, so we're generating cash for capital investment above operating expenses and debt service. And so it has been historically, the target was based on depreciation expense, which, for the sewer utility was about $1.7 million per year that it was having to generate above operating expenses and debt service. And so looking at the fund forecast and the capital needs, it was generating more money than we needed at this particular time. And so what we did to get to this outcome was we said, what if we relax that policy, set the rates to generate the cash that you actually need for the planned projects, and then we can reduce the rest of the rate forecast, and it'll be a 2-year reduction for 23 and 24,
right?
And then 25 and onward, we would resume CPI.
I see. And get back to the same level in 2028.
Well, and we wouldn't necessarily, yeah, and I guess it kind of works out that way. But really what it was is basically 2025 onward, we just go back to CPI. And so if CPI is higher or lower, it'll be different. So it was not intending to make up the 12%. It's just going back to CPI. But the main thing is, if we relax that policy, this is what we can do. And, I think that's certainly a valid policy call to make. If we're showing the sewer utility has $10+ million in reserve for capital, and there isn't that much, in the next few years, you have the option of easing some of that funding, and then, in the future, as capital needs dictate that you need more, then there'd be a ramping up. But at the very least, this gives you some near-term relief.
Okay.
What's the 10?
Yeah. So Ryan, the question really is for you. Like, I feel like we've talked a lot about infrastructure, right? And just these capital improvement projects and things like that. And then this decrease, and then obviously the 3% over the 4 years. And you said it's not to catch up the negative 12% or whatever, but this isn't going to cause some sort of shortfall in us being able to maintain systems and things like that. I feel like that's been the conversation, is these systems, keeping them up and running and good. This is not concerning to you?
This takes into consideration, sorry, I can't see anybody, so I try to take up, when somebody pauses. This takes into consideration the capital project list that Ryan has provided, FCS.
Provided list, I did hear that.
Yes. It includes all of those projects. And like you said, the 3%, while it looks suspicious, it's CPI. So it could be 2%. It could be, like this year, it would have been 8.5%, right? Some years we've seen 1%. So it's going to be CPI. It's not going to just recoup that 12%. I looked at the numbers when we talked about it because, from my perspective, I had a whoa moment. And when I looked at it, I thought, no, that seems reasonable to me. That is the revenue I forecasted for 2023 anyways. So I felt comfortable with this.
But I thought what Ryan had said, and, correct me if I'm wrong, but yes, it's all the projects that you had said, that needs to be done. But I felt like you were still pretty clear that there's still more that does need to be done. So then if we're just kind of at a minimum line here for covering what you said, right?
Yeah, so when we look at how we're going to finance the utility, obviously we're looking at our CIP efforts, and we're looking at what our operation and maintenance costs are as well.
Yeah.
And that's what went into figuring this out. And so I'm confident with this that we're still going to be bringing in the revenue we need to maintain the services that we provide, maintain our infrastructure. Okay. It's just right sizing it based on what the needs are project wise right now.
Okay. Yeah, I think the cost to disclose is there's less money available for longer term stuff. And so if those needs come up, beyond what's in the current CIP, we might have to say, okay, 2 or 3 rate study cycles down the road, okay, now we need to start ramping it higher than CPI because we have these projects that we need to fund. And
when you say longer term stuff, are you referring to, or is that just a generality, or?
I'm saying a generality. So if you think about all of your assets right now, they have a life cycle. Okay. So let's say for all your sewer mains, let's say it's a 70-year life or whatever it is. It's like, so then we could look at what are all your assets based on the typical life expectancy. When do you have to replace things?
Okay.
And so the purpose of the system reinvestment policy is to generate cash funding for that stuff.
Yes.
So that we're not having to borrow a bunch of money, or you will probably still have to borrow, but sort of balancing cash versus debt, because you don't want to put everything on the future and be sky high in debt, but you also don't want existing ratepayers to pay for all the stuff and then you're just sitting on cash for decades.
Yes.
So it's really balancing that they call it generational equity as to how we fund those long-term needs of the system. And so the depreciation-based funding benchmark it's a sound policy, and many utilities do it. The main thing here is, just given all the other considerations, it is a pressure valve that we have available to us if we want to relax that policy temporarily and then revisit it down the road. I think the key would be to sort of ramp things up steadily over time, instead of surprising anyone. And there is the flexibility if a major project comes up that is not known, like Sumner says, okay, well, you need to have $10 million for a plant upgrade. There is potential to borrow.
I see.
And I would just add that this really shines a light on another thing that's really important here, which is the importance of our utility planning exercises, our water system plan, our sewer comprehensive plan, because that's what's informing the work he's doing here. And so tagging onto that, I would just humbly make the suggestion that instead of letting 5 years lapse between rate analyses, that we fall into a more reliable frequency of looking at our rates. It's not uncommon to see some cities are doing it every, once a biennium or something like that. So that will help us anticipate those needs that come in the future and be able to plan for them better.
And you don't need any humility.
And-
You can be as obnoxious as you want if that's a solid.
You can make me
I'll
blush.
step in here. I would prefer we do every 4 years looking at rates. There's a huge cost to doing a rate study, time as well as financial. This isn't the only time we look to see where we're at. I continually every year look to see, okay, did we make our projections? Are we on track with where we should be in order to stay in line with what FCS is telling us? And, I started throwing up the red flags, I think, last year to Ryan saying, hey, our storm is not looking good and our water's starting to look really bad. And so we then come to you with SDC or, with FCS coming out to redo a rate study. I think if we just get on a 4-year schedule, that would probably prevent a lot of these very large increases we have seen.
So for you said 10 to 8 though on that,
Yes.
right? And that's a 2% reduction. Is that 2% on top of the 12? So it's a total of 14?
No. Well, a 14% reduction in revenue. So basically the 12% comes after we already made that change and reduced revenues by 2%.
This is kind of off the topic, but talking about revenues, are we able to invest our enterprise funds in mutual bonds, short-term, long-term, where we can?
Yes. There's a policy, there's a code out there currently that councils prior to me only wanted investments in the LGIP. So currently all of our investments are in the LGIP. I do have entities that reach out to me monthly asking, when are you going to look at addressing this policy and investing in us? So that's absolutely something we can discuss.
What is LGIP?
Local government.
The local government investment pool. So it's like the government's mutual fund, if you will. All your cash just gets over there. You can. The good thing with LGIP is that there's no waiting period for your money. If I want it tomorrow, I need it tomorrow, I can get it tomorrow. Some of the investment, I don't know, I don't want to go too off topic here, but some of the investment avenues do not allow that. There's investments for 90 days, 6 months, whatever.
What's the yield rate we're getting on that?
I'm not sure. It's lower than what you could get at an investment agency, but it's also riskier. So I can get you that rate. I can check online, but I don't have it off the top of my head.
I just see that reduced system revenues by 2%. Feel like that could be easily captured with some low risk investments.
Yeah.
And I will say, in our forecast, we are projecting interest earning on the reserve balances. So, there is some of that already factored in.
Okay.
Oh, I just pulled up the rates for you. Councilmember Evans, the daily yield is 4.37 and the true 30-day yield is 4.30. So about 4.3 right now.
Yeah.
None of those investments are like Johnny Two Fingers or Collins.
When it's in the LGIP is the safest investment vehicle out there. It's managed by the state treasurer's office, and they're limited on where they can invest it, which is why you receive a smaller yield than you would with some of the other investments.
I mean, we do have a fiduciary duty to be risk averse, you know?
You do.
Okay, now let's get back on topic.
Yeah. I mean, I think stormwater financial plan, there's really nothing different from what we talked about last time. The key is we have some different scenarios, and I don't know, Ryan, if there's anything that you would like to say about the stormwater capital plan at this time, but.
No, I don't think so at this time. Other than to just say that again, the stormwater utility has struggled for quite some time. It's been at the same rate for ESU for years. I think that was somewhere here in the presentation. And in order to keep up with the CIP list that we have and will have moving forward, in addition to hopefully over time increasing staffing in this utility, making sure that we're funded properly is critical. So.
Yeah, is that something we're going to bring up tomorrow?
So, with our visitor, yeah, with her, we certainly can. Yeah.
The scenarios we presented here, the top one is basically what if you funded everything cash, so no borrowing. We see 11 to 12% rate increases, and I mean, it sounds like a high number on a percentage basis. We look at the change from prior year. I mean, the stormwater rate is relatively low, so we're looking at something that's not even a $2 increase in the monthly bill.
And I'm just concerned about comparability. How does this compare to our neighbors?
Much better than Buckley.
So if you want to see the sample bill comparison, you can compare the stormwater rates. The city's at 14, and then they're sort of all over the place. I think there are some that have like the NPDES, National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, permit requirements that require operating and capital investments that can drive that rate up. So there is some of that going on. And the rates are creeping up over time as those needs magnify and accumulate. But overall, I think your stormwater rates are well in the comparable range, and the water is also well in the comparable range. And sewer has been relatively high for reasons that we discussed, but with the proposal here, it'll be that much closer to the rest of the group.
Yeah.
So our overall proposal, so it's on the right, all in black there.
Yes.
So we'd still be at the top, even with the proposed change.
Yeah, well, I think the water bill would change. Right.
Well, the overall bill is
overall bill is
still at the top.
The sewer. Yeah. And so the sewer reduction is helpful, but it's still a relatively high sewer rate.
Yeah, take into consideration once before we talk about getting loans to offset some of Ryan's projects. Have you looked at it all? What would happen if we did? Is that part of your consideration here? Because he's got these 2 tanks where we can get loans for those to offset over the next number of years.
I think it's something we could look at, but we hesitate to show scenarios based on loans that aren't in hand because, I mean, especially over the past few years, I mean, I feel like the loan programs have been kind of scarce and not funded. So, I mean, I'd sort of rather come back with this is the more costly alternative and then say, oh, well, we got a lower cost loan versus getting you all fixated on, a 1% loan and then find out, oh, no, we have to actually bond for it at 4.5% to 5%.
And I just wanted to remind the council, the last conversation we had, it sounded like the council was very adverse to any debt. So we instructed Chris to move forward with trying to do cash as you guys had discussed last meeting. There was a lot of discussion around not wanting to incur debt.
That was 5 weeks ago.
That was one of my questions. I know.
Things have changed.
And
different year.
So long.
And that's what I didn't
That,
understand.
yeah, that was last year.
That was last year. It was almost last century. But that, Councilmember Watson brings that up. You're talking, it's debt, basically, whether it's a loan or bond or what have you,
Correct.
is a financial vehicle that's available to any business that should be used. In my mind, I don't know. I don't completely understand why the councils or a majority of, or if not, opposed to using the tools that are available. So, I don't. If that's the way it is, I don't really care if I lose that particular argument. But I think it's extraordinarily dumb not to use debt if that makes your rates cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought he said that if we were to incur the debt, that it really wouldn't shave off very much off of the bills. And that's why we were averse to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that what it was? That it was
it
like
evens
so
them out.
minimal. It was like pennies on the dollar. It
Well,
seemed.
I mean, we're talking about, back on the
Unless
water.
it shaved a lot. Then.
Well, it just depends on what shaving you look, right?
Yeah.
It's where you look at.
Yeah, the water side we were talking about, at least last time, it was around roughly a 2% reduction in the annual rate increase. And I mean, it was, there was an impact, but it was probably like $1 over a few years in the monthly bill, which, I mean, it's not nothing. But then when you issue, like, say, bonds, there are coverage requirements, there are reserve requirements. I mean, the bond rating agencies are asking utilities to maintain a 2.0 coverage ratio, which means your rates have to be enough to cover operating expenses plus 2 times your debt service. And they want you to maintain reserves 180 days of operating expenses. And so as we start going into debt, these policy targets become more of an issue for you. And that's what I mean when I say, we lose some flexibility.
Yeah.
We put another form.
And to be clear, I'm not advocating against these.
No, yeah.
I'm simply saying
They're
there are
good.
considerations.
Definitely good arguments, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But if it's a vehicle that
It is.
provides, significant value, I would hate to just not consider it on the basis of some philosophical argument that,
Well, especially because we have one of the highest rates on that, and we get done with this anyway. It'd be nice to get a little bit of a reduction for a few years anyway. Because again, Ryan's got so many big projects going on.
Well, and I think that sewer is not the one that would need debt. I mean,
Right,
we're basically cutting the system reinvestment, at least temporarily, because we already have enough to fund the sewer projects. So, I mean, as far as debt goes, it makes the most sense when you have a big ticket project, and that your alternative is to raise rates to generate the cash, or you can borrow and then pay it back over time with the principal and interest.
He's got 2 water tanks.
And so, we looked at the water rate scenario and last time, and we could certainly reintroduce a borrowing scenario if the council's interested.
depends on what it looks like, right?
Yeah,
It does. It
significant savings, I would say, would be worth looking at. It's only $1.
Well, it doesn't save; it moves things
Well,
around.
yeah.
It's kind of this cash
Like you
flow
need your own
thing.
borrowed money. If we can make it help the citizens a little bit over the long run.
Yeah.
Instead not getting
The proposed plan here does seem to do that. We can't take that out of consideration. That's a fairly significant drop. Even though we're still at the top, we're still looking at over $11. And that's good.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I appreciate the work. Yeah.
You did. Thank you.
Still
Thank
number
you.
one in the
Yeah.
category we don't want.
didn't go up.
Right.
Fingers.
So, yeah.
But baby steps, people.
So I guess to pull this all together, I mean, we had our kind of a summary of everything. We have the updated SECs. It sounds like Ryan and I are going to have a little discussion about the water SEC and making sure that we are correctly accounting for the capacity. And, so that charge might go up depending on what happens from that discussion. For the revenue increases, we're talking about for water, there's the 8.5% increase that's already been adopted. And then we're looking at sort of 5.5%, actually 5.5% increases per year for the next several years after that. Sewer, we've got our decrease and the rate structure change, and then also the CPI after 2025 and beyond. Stormwater, we're showing the debt scenario here, but again, I think something I'd like to know from you is what scenarios are sort of looking the best. And I mean, I can come back with a water and stormwater sort of maximize the debt to the extent it makes sense to see how far we can get the rate increases down, and then do sort of the pay as you go and kind of give you bookends, and do something like that if there's interest.
Well, yeah, right.
And,
Oh,
and
there
one
is.
other
I'm
thing,
interested.
sorry. One other thing I'd like to throw out there is we discussed using ARPA for the water, and we got pushback for using that. Would you consider using it for some of the stormwater projects? If so, we might be able to reduce some of those proposed rates.
Why not? I would agree.
Yeah, I'd be good with that.
Okay. So yeah, we could put the ARPA in stormwater and see how far we can get the increases down.
That'd be great.
That actually would be helpful.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jess.
Some set aside for the senior center.
Yes.
I just wanted to mention, and I think it's CDC, they're somewhat aware, we are constantly, it seems like anyways, in our stormwater utility receiving new requirements through our NPDES permit for additional monitoring and sampling and testing and so on, because we want to make sure the water quality of that runoff is really good. It's not going to contaminate stuff. So there are increased costs there that we've just been now becoming aware of. And so I just throw that out there as if the council is good with using ARPA money in the stormwater utility, that could be really helpful for us and offset some of those costs from these unfunded mandates.
And that would go back to what we always wanted to do with keeping that within our residents rather than
Right.
water rate where it spreads
Exactly.
over.
Okay.
So, I mean,
I like that
that's basically
scenario.
it. I think it sounds like I'll be developing a couple of bookends, doing a little follow-up on the water STC, but otherwise.
Well, thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Chris.
Good job.
All right, I'll clap.
Thanks, Chris.
All right, thank you.
All right, next we have council open discussion. Do we have anything that we haven't discussed in the last 5 or 6 weeks? Councilmember Watson.
Again, I've got two simple things. Councilperson Fullerton and myself and Leslie Harris attended the Commission Families Coalition meeting this month. Very good presentation. We weren't there very long because we were more important to us to go to the swearing of the new 2 sergeants, so we were there for that. So we did, I think, really was impressed by that and the amount of people that were there for that swearing in. And what's interesting, this Thursday is the new it's our chamber collective meeting on Thursday, 11:30 to 1. And they have a new executive director they're going to do this on Thursday. So
Yeah, I found that out this morning.
I talked to him last week. He's excited. Did a great job knowing him for years, and he's a real networking type person. So it'll be a nice addition to the chamber in the future.
Oh, that would definitely help.
He's looking at getting for more people on the board too.
Well, let's hope so, because
Yeah, I know.
we really need to build it up. Councilmember Fulton.
Yes, so on Friday the 13th, I was able to attend the meeting with the interlocal agreement with the school district for the recreation program. So the school board will be voting this Wednesday, February 15th, on the contract for the Right at School.
Yes.
They'll also be discussing at some point a certain amount of yearly funds that they're willing to put towards the recreation program to combine to make up for the loss of the revenue for the before and after care. So they will be voting on that contract, and I think that was about it.
And
yeah.
Mr. McEwen did say you were going to present that in open discussion tonight. I certainly appreciate all the work that both of you have done on this. Did you get a feel for how likely it is that the right of work would pass?
Oh, yeah, the contract is going to be signed the September 1st.
Yeah, without speaking for the school board,
right.
There's a strong belief that it will be discussed and most likely approved at their.
And we don't want to jinx it.
February 15th. council meeting.
All right, thank you. Okay, Councilmember
I'm
Fulton.
still going. Also, I had a couple different things that I wanted to discuss. Where was it? Oh, I received a phone call from some of the residents in Graham, and they heard about our resolution against in opposition of the airport in Enumclaw, which is now not going to happen, but it's looking like between Graham and Ording, which is still going to affect our traffic patterns. So they were requesting that we could write the resolution, but include Graham and Ording in a new resolution with their names added, just in support of their concerns for having the greenfield airports put out there, affecting all of their people. So that was another thing. And then also I was wondering if there is a possibility of getting some training for probably all of us really, but mostly for the city council. The state is violating their oath of office when they're bringing forth legislation that is going to restrict or infringe upon our 2A amendments. We can't be compliant in this. We need to start standing up for our rights as well as the city of Bonnie Lake. There has to be something that we can do as a council where we push back on the state legislation, because you cannot make a law, the state cannot make a law that goes against the Constitution.
Sure they can.
Then it's not a law.
That's not true.
So,
I'm sorry if we, how about we table this until we get a better, this is, again, we're getting into Constitutional Law 101, and rather than just speak off the cuff, we need to know, and this I have to insist upon. This seems more, not as a city, it seems more of a personal, and we need to keep this either at a city.
To the Constitution
Mhm.
of the United States and the Constitution of Washington State.
Yes.
This terrifies me.
Yeah.
I am not going up against a firing squad because you're going to tell me that I have to do something when I don't have to. I'm not going to go against my constitutional rights. I'm not going against the people's constitutional rights. So if I swore an oath, don't tell me that I don't have the right to speak.
I didn't say you didn't have the right to
Don't shut me up.
speak.
You just tried to shut me up.
Well, actually, it does go against our rules for you to speak on this subject. There are rules that we do have to follow, and this is one of them. Like I say, if you wish, we can put together. I'm speaking right off the cuff here because but.
I'm asking.
What I can tell you, Councilmember Fullerton, is that the way that this is being approached is not the history of our government. It's not how it has ever worked. And if you're going to try to say that we as a council have to step up for that, well, I cannot speak for the council because I'm the mayor, but I do represent this city. And as a city who's trying very desperately to get back into the government fold so that we can get the resources that we need for our city, then this is not something that we're going to bring up in open council discussion unless we go by the rules. And the thing about it is that what you're saying right now, I guess what I am...
Mr. Mayor, right, wrong, or indifferent, she has the right to say what she wants in open council. And I will make a motion to suspend rules if I have to in order to allow her to say that. Whether we agree with it or not, that is her right to do that here.
Okay. Motion has been put forth. Is there a second? Second. Okay. All in favor of suspending rules so that Councilmember Fullerton can say what she wishes about us fighting our government? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. Any opposed? Okay, seeing no opposed, it's been passed 7-0. Councilmember Fullerton, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So what I'm asking, though, is for training, because we've been elected, we've been sworn in. We're also supposed to be going, we're supposed to be doing the Robert's Rules of Order or the other one that we haven't quite figured out which ones we're going to be doing. So, I mean, the AWC tells us what we can't do, but they don't tell us what we can do. I was sworn in to uphold the Constitution. And it's my understanding that when it's a federal amendment, like the Second Amendment, as well as the First Amendment, which was infringed upon when we had a proclamation that said we oppose misinformation speech. You're telling people what they can and can't think, what they can and can't say in Bonnie Lake. That's unconstitutional. You're telling people that they, and I was told when we had the open carry last year, the issue that I had with the constitutionality, I was told, oh, well, it's only open carry. It's not going to infringe upon your right to conceal. It doesn't matter. When are we going to stop complying, or when are we going to start standing up for our oath of office and doing what we're supposed to be doing? This actually terrifies me, because if we're going to sit down and we're not going to stand by our oath, I take that very seriously. I was elected by the people to stand for them and to stand for their rights, and this is terrifying to me, because I am not going to be set up for treason because I didn't stand up for my oath of office.
And I do understand that. And I will say upon further
Is there training that we need to understand the Constitution? Anybody who has sworn an oath here in this room, you have to stand up for the Constitution, period. That is your job. So to be told by the state, oh, we made a new law, forget the fact that it goes against the Second Amendment. It's infringing on the Second Amendment. 5 bills, not just one new law, and it looks like they have the numbers. So 5 new bills that are going to infringe on the people's right. This is not okay. And there has to be something. And I'm asking our city attorney, is there, and I asked you specifically, are we going to have a new city attorney that's going to understand the Constitution?
He does.
So is there training for us, for anybody who has taken an oath of office, to stand up for our rights? I'm not trying to be somebody... I'm not trying to make waves, and I don't want to go up against the state, but there has to be training in how we can write rules and write ordinances and resolutions and proclamations and anything else that's actually constitutional. And if we have to once in a while get a legislature or a lobbyist to go in on our behalf as a city and at least attempt to fight back or to push back on constitutional issues, that's what we're here for, as far as I'm concerned. When I swore an oath, that was a promise, and it was under God. And I am not going to violate my Heavenly Father, and I'm not going to violate my oath. And so we need to understand Robert's rules. We need to understand how we're going to run these meetings, and we need to understand if there's training available, because I'm going to go out and I'm going to get my own training if I have to. But I would certainly appreciate if the city comes up with something, but it needs to be constitutional, not AWC that tells me what I can't do all the time. I need to understand what I can do as a council member.
Yes.
And I'm done.
And before recognize Councilmember Watson. I do wish to apologize to you. We did get a bit heated there. I believe Councilmember Evans is actually, absolutely right. You do have your right to be able to speak in front of this council, and for me to try to abridge that was wrong. And it was a natural reaction. I do apologize for that because
It wasn't against you, and I do appreciate
no,
that.
and I was not trying to be
And
against.
there was no
you
offense
personally
taken.
either. So yes, if we could just
Thank you.
heat that down with it, I can't. Before we go in there, Councilmember Watson, you have.
Well, and she doesn't like what they have before us. AWC is our training and forum, our platform you can to. And they have a lot of resources there. They also stand up for our rights against the state, what the state's doing. And they're the ones for a group of cities to go against the laws the state is doing as a group. As us, as the mayor alluded to, as a city, it makes it very difficult for us to go forward for things that we need from the state if we're not working with them. And somehow we have to leverage that very gently to get your viewpoints across, which I agree with if that like see more details, but that's how we go. And AWC will then go to the state for us and leverage what the cities are disagreeing with, whether it be 5 or 6 cities or 12. They'll do that for us. And they have attorneys, which I would suggest you calling them. They're very helpful, done before numerous times, and they will help direct you and tell you what we can and what we can't do as council persons. That's the first thing you have to find out. And I would call them tomorrow. They're very good to work with.
And we do have lobbyists. They're called our state representatives.
Thank you.
Our state representatives, right, but they're the ones that.
And I was going to expound after this happened. Now, one thing I do know is that Ms. Robertson did send all of us a memo on this. Did you read the memo about the jurisdictions and?
Yes, but that was how our city government is formed in creation.
Excuse
and the
me, we
creator
please make
is
sure we
the
do not
state.
waive attorney-client privilege
Yeah.
incidentally by discussing a privileged communication.
Okay.
But I'm happy to address Councilmember Fullerton's questions.
Thank you. And the other thing I can tell you is that I did go to a mayor exchange last week for AWC. I did meet a lot of our mayors from our neighboring cities. I can say that Mayor Enumclaw was very pleased with our vote on the airport, and he did express his gratitude in that regard. I do agree that should be was Graham and who?
Graham and Ording.
And
I
Ording.
would say by default, all of Pierce County, and then just include
Yeah,
everything for future use.
and if we could send it out to them to let them know that they have our support, but it will affect our traffic as well.
And one of the things that we will be doing is keeping in closer touch with our representatives, with Representative Robertson and Senator Fortunato's office. So we'll see how that goes this session.
That would be fantastic.
And we can all use more training, believe me.
Yes. And so if we can do like some type of a constitutional training for that is based off of our oath of office, because I'm just doing my job is not.
No, I can certainly understand that. Do we have any further discussion? Oh, Councilmember Evans.
Motion to reinstate the rules if that's what's necessary to close out the meeting. I'm not sure.
Is there a second? Okay. Do we have any further discussion besides reinstating the rules? Oh, yes, we do have review of the council minutes. Councilmember Watson.
We had 2 corrections.
And, two. And have they been?
They have them.
Yes. All right. Okay. On that note, I believe we don't have an executive for closed session, so this meeting is adjourned.
We'll look at you all night.